My name is Tarik Al Raheem. I am 28 years old and I was born in Dearborn, Michigan, a city with a strong Muslim community. Growing up there meant being immersed in a culture where faith was not just something we practiced, but who we were. From an early age, I learned that the Quran contained all the truths I needed to know. Islam was the only way, and following its teachings was more than a choice. It was the foundation of our existence. My parents, Yusuf and Layla, were always very devout, and they made a point of raising their children within the precepts of their faith. The 5 daily prayers, fasting during Ramadan, going to the mosque on Fridays, all of these were part of our routine, but more than that, they were part of us. In our household, questioning our faith was not welcome. In fact, it was almost unthinkable. To raise doubts felt like a betrayal, not just of our religion but of our family, our history, our entire community. I remember when as a teenager I started to wonder about certain passages in the Quran or rules that didn't seem to make much sense to me. Whenever I brought it up, my father's expression would change. In a serious voice he would say, "Tarik, these doubts are whispers from Shaitan. Push those thoughts away." And I did. Not because I was forced to, but because I trusted him. I didn't want to disappoint him. But everything started to change when I entered college. Suddenly I was thrown into a world completely different from the one I had known. Surrounded by people from diverse backgrounds, beliefs, and lifestyles, I felt lost at first. It was as if I had lived my entire life in black and white, and now I was seeing color for the first time. It was in this new environment that I met Daniel Petrov, an Orthodox Christian who eventually became my friend. At first, my intention was very clear. I wanted to convince him that Islam was the only truth, but Daniel did not react as I expected. He did not argue with me or mock my beliefs. He listened, with attention, with respect, and when he responded, he did so calmly, without trying to convert me, without judging me. This friendship began to shake my certainties. For the first time, I began to look at everything I believed in with a more critical eye. In secret, I began to read the Bible, driven by curiosity to understand what Daniel believed. At the same time, I delved even deeper into the Quran, looking for answers. I wanted to find in the sacred words a confirmation of what I had always heard, but instead even more questions arose. I felt torn. On one hand, there was the immense love I felt for my family, for my culture, for everything that shaped me. On the other, there was this thirst to know more, to understand more, to see beyond what I had been taught. And it was in the midst of this inner turmoil that something happened, something that turned my life upside down. I had a near-death experience. But before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand one thing. I was just an ordinary young man. I wasn't a theology scholar. I wasn't anything special. I was just me, Tarik, with my doubts, my fears, and my hopes. And it was this ordinary Tarik who experienced something completely out of the ordinary. It happened on a seemingly normal day. I was coming home after school with my head full of thoughts. I remembered the passages from the Bible that Daniel had shown me, and some verses from the Quran that I reread with different eyes. I was so immersed in my thoughts that I didn't even realize right away when something started to go wrong. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart tightly. At first I thought it was just fatigue or some passing discomfort, but the pain grew worse and my breathing began to falter, as if my lungs were closing up. I looked around for help, but the street was eerily empty. My legs gave out, and before I could understand what was happening, I fell to the ground. The last thing I saw was the blue sky above me, and then everything went black. I don't know how much time passed. I just know that suddenly I was floating. It's hard to describe that feeling. It was as if I were outside my body. From up there, I saw myself lying on the sidewalk, motionless. I saw people approaching, someone calling the ambulance. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The next thing I remember is opening my eyes in an emergency room. Bright lights, loud voices, hurried footsteps. It all seemed to come from far away, as if I were listening from the bottom of a lake. Doctors and nurses were rushing around me, their speech blurred, but I still managed to make out one sentence that froze me inside. "We have no heartbeat. Start CPR." At that moment I understood what had happened. I was dead, clinically dead. It was surreal. I could see my body lying on the stretcher, pale, lifeless, as they tried to revive me. I wanted to scream, to tell them that I was there, that I could see and hear everything, but no sound came out. It was as if my soul was trapped between two worlds. And then, something even more extraordinary happened. I felt like I was being pulled upward, like an invisible force was pulling me away from that room, that hospital, that life. Everything around me began to shine with an indescribable intensity, but it wasn't a light that hurt the eyes. It was soft, welcoming, warm. It was like being wrapped in a hug I didn't even know I needed. As I approached that light, a deep peace came over me, a peace I had never felt before. The fears I had been carrying, the worries about my family, my faith, my future, everything dissolved. For the first time in my life, I felt at home, and then I saw him. In the center of that intense and serene light was Jesus. This wasn't the Jesus in the paintings, or the one in the stories told in books. He was real, alive. His presence was so strong that it took my breath away. He smiled at me, and in that smile there was a love that could not be described. An absolute, unconditional love that made me feel completely naked, but not ashamed, just accepted, totally, deeply accepted. He didn't speak with words, but somehow I understood him perfectly. It was as if his very presence was saying to me, "Tarik, I've always been here. I've always waited for you." At that moment, all the doubts that had plagued me disappeared. Questions about religion, faith, salvation, they all seemed so small before him. I stood before truth, before pure love. Nothing else mattered, and I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay in that light forever. But then, with the tenderness of a father waking a sleeping child, I felt Jesus telling me that it was not my time, that there was still something for me to do in this world, that there was a purpose waiting for me. Before I could say anything, I was pulled back, like I was being sucked into my body again. The light was gone, the peace was gone, and suddenly I opened my eyes. I was back in the emergency room, breathless, confused, and completely different. The doctors were in shock. One of them said out loud, "It's a miracle, he's back." And it really was. My heart had stopped for 5 minutes, and there I was, alive. No after effects. But more than coming back to life, I had come back with something inside me that had never existed before. I spent a week in the hospital. The doctors couldn't understand how this was possible. My tests were normal. My brain was functioning perfectly. To them, I was a rare case, a medical mystery. But to me, I was a changed man. Lying in that bed, I relived every second of the experience. The sensation of floating above my body, the light that seemed to embrace my soul, and above all, the encounter with Jesus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. I felt his presence. It was as if a piece of that light was still with me, warming my heart. My family was by my side the whole time. My father, Yusuf, held my hand so tightly, as if he was afraid of losing me again. My mother, Layla, alternated between silent tears and fervent prayers of gratitude. They were relieved that I was alive, but also, something in their eyes told me that they could see the change in me. I wanted to tell everything. I wanted to open my heart and tell what had happened. But how could I put into words something so eternal? How could I translate into human language what I felt in that light? Every time I tried, it seemed like words wouldn't do. Something inside me had awakened, and I knew deep down that my life would never be the same again. In addition to the confusion within me, there was also fear. How could I tell my parents, devout Muslims faithful to their faith, that their son had had a direct encounter with Jesus? How could I explain something like this without it sounding like a betrayal? In the early days, I chose silence. I let people interpret my quiet demeanor as exhaustion or a reflection of the proximity of death. But inside, I was at war. It wasn't about rejecting Islam or accepting Christianity as a simple exchange of beliefs. It was deeper, more essential. It was as if, for a few moments, I had seen something that went beyond any religious system, a pure glimpse of truth. At night, when the hospital room was silent and dark, I prayed. But these were not the prayers I had learned as a child, repeated word for word in Arabic. These were honest conversations, naked, with God, with Jesus. I asked, "Why me? Why show me this? What do you want me to do now?" It was on one of those nights amidst the whirlwind of thoughts that a nurse came into the room. She looked at me with a care that went beyond protocol, and instead of rushing out, she sat down next to the bed. She gently asked me if I was okay. Before I could stop myself, the words escaped. I told her everything: the light, the peace, the encounter with Jesus. I expected to see a look of confusion or even mockery, but no. She just took my hand and with surprising calm said, "My sister went through something similar, a near-death experience. It changes you. Just don't try to understand everything now. Give it time. Those words were a balm. For the first time since everything had happened, I felt understood. I felt less alone. I wasn't going crazy. Other people had also crossed that threshold between here and the beyond, and come back different. In the days that followed, whenever I was alone, I began to research. I would stealthily take out my phone and read everything I could about near-death experiences. I wanted to understand. I wanted to find echoes of what I had experienced, and I found it. Stories from people of all religions and backgrounds, all describing something similar: light, peace, unconditional love, the encounter with a divine presence. It was as if each had seen a facet of the same truth, and the more I read, the more I knew that it had not been a hallucination, nor a delusion. It had been real, deeply real. But with this certainty came a weight. If I had been touched by something so powerful, it couldn't be for nothing. I couldn't just go back to my routine as if nothing had happened. Something inside me had been awakened, and now I needed to figure out how to live with it. When I was finally discharged and left the hospital, I knew deep down that I wasn't just leaving as a man who had survived a heart attack. I was someone who had died, and come back different. The world outside seemed new. The colors, the sounds, the smells. Everything was more vivid, more present. It was as if I was seeing everything with newly opened eyes. But as beautiful as this new sensitivity was, I knew the challenges were just beginning. I would have to deal with difficult questions, with the inquisitive looks of my community, with the silent expectations of my family. But at the same time, I knew I was not alone. The light that welcomed me into that other reality still burned within me. The love I felt in the presence of Jesus followed me like a beacon, and it was with this in my heart that I took my first steps back to life. Coming home was like entering a familiar, yet strange place. Everything was the same. The walls of our house in Dearborn, the furniture, the family photos. Everything was just as I had left it. But I was no longer the same Tarik who had left there weeks before. In the early days, my parents were so happy to see me back that they didn't notice, or maybe they chose not to notice, how much I had changed. My mother, Layla, cooked my favorite dishes, as if the taste of food could bring her son back. My father, Yusuf, would spend hours by my side. Sometimes he would talk, sometimes he would just stand there in silence as if he needed to see me to believe I was really there. They surrounded me with affection, but I knew there was an invisible ocean between us, something they didn't know yet, but would soon have to face. As the days went by, it became increasingly difficult to hide what was happening inside me. It was like carrying a secret that burned inside. I was staring at the prayer rug in the corner of my room with a lump in my throat. A part of me felt guilty. Another one just lost. It wasn't that I had stopped believing, but the way I understood prayer, God, everything, had changed deeply. The 5 daily prayers that had once guided the rhythm of my life now seemed like empty rituals, not because they were bad or wrong, but because their meaning no longer fit within the experience I had lived. One afternoon, I sat in the back garden seeking some air, some silence. My father came over silently and sat down beside me. He watched me for a while, his eyes heavy. "Pull," he said, his voice deep and full of concern. "What's happening to you, my son? You haven't been going to the mosque. Your prayers." I knew this moment was coming. I had mentally rehearsed what to say, but still, at the time, nothing seemed enough. How could I explain an experience that I couldn't even put into words? I took a deep breath. I began to tell him. I spoke of the light, of the overwhelming peace, of the face of Jesus, of the love I had felt, so real that it penetrated every barrier I had ever known. The words came out with effort, stumbling over one another. My father listened in silence, and I could see his expression change, from concern to shock, and then to fear. When I finished, the silence between us was almost palpable. He lowered his eyes, clasped his hands together, and finally murmured, "Astaghfirullah, may Allah protect us." When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "Tarik, my son, you have been deceived by Shaitan. These visions are not real. They cannot be." I knew he would react like this, but even though I expected it, it hurt. "Good," I said, in a low voice. "I know how it sounds, but I lived it. It was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced." He stood up suddenly. "He arrives," he said firmly. "I don't want to hear any more about this. Let's call Imam Hassan. He will know what to do." In the days that followed, our home became a silent battlefield. My mother cried alone when she thought I wasn't looking. My father spent hours on the phone speaking quietly to community leaders, and I felt increasingly alone. Imam Hassan came to visit us. I always respected him. He was a wise, calm man, loved by everyone, but even he, when he heard me, could not see beyond the doctrine. He said my visions were spiritual deceptions, tests of faith, traps of the enemy. At that moment I realized that there was a chasm between us, not because of a lack of love or respect, but because of something deeper. I had crossed a line that they could not see or accept. It was at this time that I began to grow even closer to Daniel. He was the only one I could talk to freely. He never tried to convert me. He never said what I wanted, it should believe. He just listened. Sometimes he shared something of his own faith. Other times he just stood by me, like a true friend. One of those nights, sitting on the college campus, he said something that has resonated with me. Tarik, sometimes God takes us off the path we know, not to push us away but to show us something greater. It's not about abandoning a faith. It's about deepening your connection with the divine. Those words opened my eyes. Maybe I wasn't betraying my roots. Maybe I was just growing, expanding, touching something that went beyond the boundaries of religion. But how do I explain this to my family, to my community? The tension at home grew every day. When I went to the mosque, I felt the stares. I heard the whispers. People who had known me since I was little now looked at me as if I had become a stranger. One night, after a particularly intense argument with my father, I went for a walk through the quiet streets of Dearborn, the same streets I had walked through as a child. The houses, the smells, the lights, everything was the same, except for me. There, alone, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could try to forget everything, bury my experience, go back to my routine, make everyone happy, or I could be true to the truth I had touched, even if it meant losing the acceptance of the ones I loved the most. The choice was painful, but deep down I already knew the answer. I couldn't deny what I experienced. I couldn't pretend that I didn't feel what I felt, that I didn't see what I saw. I returned home with a heavy but determined heart. I loved my family, my community, my history, but I also needed to honor what had been revealed to me. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, full of loss perhaps, but also full of purpose. And most of all, I knew I was no longer alone. The light I had experienced, the love I had felt, were still with me, and it was this certainty, silent but firm, that gave me the strength to face whatever came. Deciding to be honest about my near-death experience and my encounter with Jesus was not an impulsive decision. I already knew there would be consequences, but even though I prepared myself internally, nothing could have shielded me from the pain that actually came. It all happened on a Friday night. It was a sacred moment for us. Our family would always gather for collective prayer and then share a home-cooked meal. It was a tradition filled with meaning, and that night the air was heavy. My father barely touched his food. My mother, normally so talkative, remained quiet, picking at her plate without eating. And I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. After dinner, with my heart racing and my hands shaking, I took a deep breath and said, "Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you about what happened to me in the hospital, about what I saw." My father held up his hand before I could continue. His voice was low but firm. "Tarik, please, think carefully about what you are going to say. Think about your family, our faith, our community. It is precisely out of respect for you, out of love for all of this, that I need to be honest." I replied, trying to contain my emotion. What I experienced was real. I saw Jesus. I felt his love. It changed everything inside me. What followed was like a storm. My father stood up from the table, his voice raised, accusing me of being deceived, of betraying the faith he had fought so hard to teach me. My mother wept silently, tears streaming down her face without her saying a word. I tried to explain between accusations that I was not rejecting Islam, but rather trying to express an experience that had expanded my view of God. But it was like talking to a wall. The discussion went on for hours. At one point, my father said something that still resonates with me to this day. "If you persist in this madness, Tarik, you will no longer have a place in this house." It was like being hit in the chest. A piece of me shattered right there. I looked at my mother, hoping to find a thread of support, but she looked away, unable to face me. That hurt more than any words spoken. That night, I slept little, or rather, I just lay down, reliving every second of that conversation. I wondered with a heavy heart if I had done the right thing. But every time doubt arose, I remembered the light, the peace, that love that enveloped me completely. And inside me the answer was clear. Yes, I did what needed to be done. The next morning the house was cold, not because of the weather but because of the lack of any affection. My father didn't say a word to me. My mother just watched me with sadness in her eyes, without saying much. It was on that day that I received a message from Daniel. It is good too. I needed to get out, breathe, to see someone who didn't treat me like a traitor or a sick person. We met at a cafe near the college. As soon as he saw me, Daniel knew something was wrong. I told him everything. I let it all out like someone who needs to get a weight off their chest before sinking. He listened to me attentively, without rushing, and when I finished, he grabbed my shoulder and said, "What you're going through is very difficult, Tarik, but you're not alone. You never were." His words were a balm. They didn't erase the pain, but they reminded me that I wasn't alone on this path. The following days were even harder. My father refused to speak to me directly. I passed messages on to my mother. I began to hear whispered conversations about taking me to a religious leader to cast out evil spirits. The idea that my experience could be seen as something evil devastated me. Soon, word spread throughout the community. People I had grown up with looked at me strangely, as if I had become someone dangerous. Some tried to bring me back. Others simply avoided me. The isolation became suffocating. Until a week after that night, my father called me to talk. He sat in the living room, his eyes tired, looking as if he had aged 10 years in just a few days. "Paul," he began, in a tone that mixed tiredness and hope, "I gave you time to reconsider. Are you ready to admit your mistake and get back on the right track?" I looked at him, that man who had always been my hero, my role model, and I felt my heart break into 1,000 pieces. "Well," he said with a choked voice, "I love you. I love our family. I love everything you taught me, but I can't deny what I lived. I know deep down that it was real, that it was true." He closed his eyes, as if my answer had caused him physical pain, as if in that moment I had died to him. And there, in that silent room, I understood the price of following the truth, but I also understood its value. When my father opened his eyes again, there was a coldness in them that I had never seen before. "So that's it," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have made your choice. I cannot allow someone who rejects our faith to continue living under this roof. You have until tomorrow to leave." The words didn't surprise me. Deep down, I knew they were coming. But even so, they hurt like a bolt of lightning through my chest. My mother, who had been listening from the doorway, let out a muffled sob and ran down the hall. My instinct was to go after her, hold her, and tell her that I was still the same son I had always been. But I knew that at that moment, nothing I could say would change how she was feeling. That night, as I quietly packed my things, the reality of what was happening hit me full force. I was losing my family, my home, everything I had ever known as home. Fear and doubt began to surround me like shadows in a dark room. For a moment I thought about going back, saying it had all been a mistake. But then, in the midst of that inner chaos, I felt a gentle peace, the same peace that had enveloped me in the presence of Jesus. It was as if a silent voice said, "I'm with you." The next morning I left the house where I grew up, carrying only a backpack with a few clothes and a few belongings. My mother hugged me at the door, with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "May Allah guide you back to us." My father didn't say a word. He just watched from the window, his face closed, as if I were already a stranger. As I walked the streets of Dearborn, feeling the weight of my backpack and an even heavier weight in my heart, I realized my life would never be the same again. The price of living my truth was higher than I could have imagined. But despite the pain, there was a calm certainty within me. The most difficult journey of my life was just beginning, and even though I didn't know what was coming, I wasn't alone. The light and love I had felt were still with me. I took my first steps towards an uncertain, but ultimately true, future. Leaving my parents' house was, without a doubt, the most painful moment of my life. I found myself alone, with a backpack on my back and a completely different world in front of me. That first day, I wandered the streets of Dearborn, places that had always been part of my history but now felt strange, even hostile. They carried the looks and whispers of a community that no longer saw me as one of their own. It was Daniel who saved me. I called him, trying to keep my voice steady, but as soon as I heard the hello on the other end of the line, the words started to fail. "My couch is yours for as long as you need it," he replied without hesitation. His generosity touched me deeply, not just by offering me shelter but by welcoming me without judgment. The first few days at Daniel's house were a whirlwind. There were moments of relief, when I felt free to finally not have to hide what I felt or what I believed. But there were also deep silences, nights when I found myself staring at my phone, waiting for a call that never came, hoping in vain for a message from my parents saying that it had all been a misunderstanding. But the phone remained silent. Daniel's family welcomed me with an open heart. They never tried to convert me. They never pressured me. They just gave me a space to breathe, to be myself. His mother, Sarah, a kind woman with a ready smile, would sometimes find me awake on the couch in the early hours of the morning, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. On those nights, she would sit beside me, silent or saying only what was necessary. One of those early mornings, she placed a cup of hot tea in my hands and said, "Tarik, sometimes God takes us down difficult paths, not to punish us, but to prepare us for something greater." Those words hit me hard. For the first time, I began to see my pain as more than loss. Maybe it was an invitation, a call to grow, to know God in a more personal, more alive way, without the filters of tradition, without the fear of judgment. But practical reality soon knocked on the door. I needed a job. I needed a place of my own. College, thankfully, wasn't an immediate problem. I still had my scholarship. But the other expenses were there, staring me in the face. I started looking for part-time work. It wasn't easy. Dearborn is a small town, and news travels fast. Many places that would have once welcomed me with open arms now looked at me with suspicion. "It's that boy, Al Raheem. They say he had a strange vision." I heard it once while I was waiting in line. It was hard, but every no I received reminded me of why I was there. I may have lost my place at my family's table, but I hadn't lost my purpose. And I was willing to take this new journey, step by step, with faith, even in the midst of uncertainty. Getting that job at the bookstore across town seemed at first glance like just another attempt at a fresh start. The owner, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Johnson, didn't want to know anything about my past or the scars I carried. He simply said with disarming simplicity, "You know books and you know how to handle money, you're hired." And that was it. No questions asked, no judgments. That bookstore became my refuge. It was surrounded by shelves overflowing with stories, doctrines, and philosophies of life. There were books of all religions, all creeds. And there, in the cozy silence between one shelf and another, I began to allow myself to explore ideas that would previously have been forbidden, even dangerous to me. It was while reading those books that I discovered something surprising. My near-death experience was not as unique as I thought. People from all over the world, from different cultures and religions, had also experienced something similar. It was as if there was an invisible connection between us, a greater truth lurking behind religious labels. It was around this time that I started keeping a diary. I didn't intend to publish it, much less show it to anyone. It was just an attempt to organize the chaos inside me. I wrote about the experience that had changed my life, about the questions that kept coming up, about the pain of losing my family and my community. Putting it all down on paper was like breathing again after so much time of suffocation. Little by little, I began to see patterns, realizing that despite all the pain, there was an invisible thread connecting it all, a sincere search for truth, for the pure and unconditional love that I had touched, albeit briefly, on the other side of life. Over time, my support network grew. In addition to Daniel and his family, I began to meet others who had gone through similar experiences. Some, like me, had left their religions of origin. Others were following completely different spiritual paths. What united us was not a common faith, but a thirst for something deeper, something beyond the confines of organized religion. That's how I met Sophia, a former Catholic who had also experienced an NDE after a car accident. She was the one who introduced me to a support group for people who have experienced this type of experience. Going to these meetings was transformative. For the first time since that intense moment, I felt truly understood. Of course, it wasn't all easy. There were days when the longing hit me hard, overwhelming me. I would walk to our old house and stand on the other side of the street hoping, as if by some miracle, to see my mother in the garden or my father washing the car. Some days, the weight of the choice I had made seemed simply too much to bear. It was during one of those dark nights of the soul that I had a dream so real that it seemed more like a memory than a fantasy. I dreamed that I was back in that bright light from my NDE. Jesus was there smiling, He didn't say a word, he just held me close. When I woke up, my face was wet with tears, but strangely enough, my heart was light. The dream reminded me why I had chosen to follow this path, even with all the losses. 6 months after I moved out of my parents' house, I was able to rent my own little place. It was a small, simple apartment, but it was mine. On moving day, I sat on the floor among the still unopened boxes and looked around, feeling a bittersweet mix of pride and sadness. Yes, I was starting over, but at a high price. That first night there, alone in my new home, I thought about everything I had experienced. I still didn't know where that road would take me, but I was sure of one thing. I was not alone. The light I saw, the love I felt, they were still with me. And for now, that was enough. The rebuilding of my life was far from over. There were still bridges to cross, and perhaps some to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with the path I had chosen. It wasn't what I had dreamed of. It wasn't easy, but it was mine, and that was enough to keep me moving forward, one step at a time. As the months passed, something unexpected began to happen. My story, that of a young Muslim man who had a near-death experience and saw Jesus, began to spread beyond the small circle of people who knew me. It all started simply. At one of the support group meetings, I shared my experience. Among those present was Rebecca, a freelance journalist. She was visibly touched by what she heard and asked me for permission to write an article for a local blog. At first, I hesitated. I had already lost so much because of this story, and the idea of exposing myself publicly scared me. But deep down, a soft voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time to share. I began to think that perhaps my story could do more than just help me process all of this. Perhaps it could offer comfort to those who were facing their own crises of faith, or even give courage to those like me, who were beginning to question long-held certainties. It was with this thought in mind that I agreed to Rebecca's request to publish the article. A few weeks later, the text went live, and what happened next caught me completely off guard. The impact was much greater than I could have imagined. People from different parts of the country started looking for me on social media. Some were full of doubts, wanting to better understand what I had experienced. Others, more skeptical, questioned whether it was all real. But there were also those who recognized themselves in my story, who shared their own inner struggles, their silent pains, their solitary journeys in search of something beyond ready-made answers. Among all the messages I received, one stuck with me. It was from a young man named Ahmed from a town not far from mine. He wrote, "Your story has given me the courage to question and explore my faith. For the first time, I don't feel alone." Simple words, but they hit me deep down. It was at that moment that I realized what I had experienced was not just mine. That experience could be a bridge. It could open up spaces. It could shine a light on paths that previously seemed too dark. Over time, invitations began to arrive to speak in small groups, community meetings, and spirituality events. At first, I didn't feel comfortable. Who was I to get up on stage and talk about faith? I wasn't a leader. I wasn't a scholar. I wasn't an expert in anything. It was just someone trying to understand what they had experienced. But the more I shared, the more I realized that this was exactly what people wanted to hear. Someone real, with real questions, trying to make sense of a world that often makes no sense at all. One of the most memorable invitations came from a local university to an interfaith event. The auditorium was packed. There were faces from all faiths, including Muslims from the community I had left behind. My heart was pounding. When I took the microphone, my voice was shaky. But as I told my story, something changed. A calmness came over me. I spoke of my near-death experience, my encounter with Jesus, and how it had changed my outlook on faith, God, and life. I ended by saying, "I am not here to convert anyone, nor to say that one religion is better than another. I am here to tell what I have experienced, to say that perhaps there is more to spiritual reality than what we can see through the lens of our traditions." When I finished, the silence was almost sacred. Then came the questions, some aggressive, some genuinely curious, and among them one that took my breath away. An elderly Muslim woman stood up and said in a choked voice, "My grandson went through something similar after an accident. We kept him quiet, afraid of what others would say. Now, listening to you, I think maybe we were wrong." I stood there, feeling the weight of those words. I realized that by telling my story, I was helping others give voice to theirs. Stories that had previously been stifled by fear, shame, or the silence imposed by tradition. But not everything was welcoming. With increased visibility came shadows. I began receiving threats online, hateful messages, accusations of betraying my faith, of being a Western undercover agent, even of being possessed by demons. Some of the messages were so violent that for a time I seriously considered stopping speaking out. Perhaps it would be safer to go back to anonymity, to disappear. But then I remembered Ahmed, the lady in the auditorium, the messages of gratitude from people who, like me, were trying to rebuild their faith amid the rubble of what they had lost. It was for them, and for me, that I kept going. Until one day, something completely unexpected happened. My phone rang. It was my mother. For a second I was paralyzed. Her voice was shaking as if she was holding back her emotions. "Taking," she said. "I still don't understand what happened to you. I still pray that God will guide you back, but I'm proud of your courage." That call lasted just a few minutes, but it was like a ray of sunshine piercing the storm. I didn't know if the wounds between us would ever be fully healed, but this was a start. Perhaps some bridges can indeed be rebuilt, one word at a time. As my story continued to spread, I began receiving invitations to appear on radio shows and podcasts. Whenever possible, I accepted, not because I was seeking fame or recognition, but because I deeply believed that these difficult conversations about faith, spirituality, and the true nature of reality were important. The world needed more space to talk about these topics. On one of these shows, the host asked me, "Tarik, after everything you've been through, how would you define your faith today?" I thought for a moment before answering. I knew this was a question that went beyond a simple definition, but I decided to take a chance. My answer came with a lightness I didn't expect. My faith today is more of a search than a certainty. It's about being open to the vastness of the divine, recognizing that no religion or tradition holds absolute truth. It's about love, compassion, and the constant search for a deeper connection with the divine, whatever name we give it. As I said these words, I felt a deep peace within me. I realized that despite all the losses and challenges, my near-death experience had given me a precious gift. The freedom to explore the divine beyond the confines of religious traditions. And more than that, the opportunity to help others do the same. The sense that my journey, though difficult, was filled with meaning, filled me with gratitude. As my story continued to unfold, I found myself engaging in more discussions about spirituality and near-death experiences. I began to realize that in order to truly understand what I had experienced, it was not enough to simply tell my story. I needed to better understand my own experience, to contextualize it within a broader field of spiritual and scientific knowledge. It was then that I began to delve into books on NDEs, consciousness, quantum physics, and comparative religious studies. I spent hours in the university library, immersed in academic and philosophical texts. The more I read, the more I understood how complex the field of spiritual experiences and human consciousness really is. One of the books that had the biggest impact on me was Life After Life by Dr. Raymond Moody. His research on near-death experiences showed that although my experience was unique to me, it shared common elements with thousands of others around the world. This made me wonder, if so many people from such different cultures and religions have similar experiences, what does this tell us about the nature of reality and consciousness? I was particularly intrigued by the similarities between NDEs and mystical experiences described in various religious traditions. The accounts of divine light, of unconditional love, of a sense of oneness with the whole, seemed to echo across the ages and cultures. I began to see my own experience not as an isolated event, but as part of a larger pattern, something that transcended the boundaries of what was considered normal or acceptable by religious traditions. My interest in these issues led me to attend conferences and workshops on consciousness and spirituality. At one such event, I had the honor of meeting Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a pioneer in the study of death and dying. Her talk on how near-death experiences can transform the way we live our lives resonated deeply with me. After the talk, I had the opportunity to chat briefly with her. When I shared a little bit of my story, she looked at me with a mix of compassion and enthusiasm and said, "Tarik, you have been given a precious gift. Use it wisely, not to prove yourself right or others wrong, but to bring more light and understanding to the world." Those words stayed with me, shaping the way I saw my mission. It was no longer about convincing others or proving the truth of my experience. It was about using what I had experienced to foster dialogue, understanding, and a broader view of spirituality. The goal was to break down barriers, bring people together, and help them understand that deep down, we are all seeking the same thing, a deep connection with the divine, no matter what name we give it. My quest for knowledge was not limited to the spiritual. I also found myself increasingly fascinated by the intersection of science and spirituality. Studies on altered states of consciousness, the effects of meditation on the brain, and quantum physics theories about the nature of reality consumed me. The more I learned, the more I realized that science, far from being contrary to spirituality, could be a valuable ally in understanding the mysteries of human consciousness. One day, while watching an online lecture on neuroscience and mystical experiences, I had an epiphany. Something inside me clicked into place as if all the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. I realized that I wasn't just searching for answers. I was being guided by a greater force, by a deep curiosity that transcends the human mind. The connection between science and spirituality was not a contradiction, but a harmony that I was still beginning to understand. The speaker was talking about how some spiritual experiences could be replicated in the laboratory through brain stimulation. For a moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. Did this mean that my experience could have been just a neurological phenomenon, with no real spiritual significance? But then something shifted inside me. Perhaps neuroscience was not trying to deny spiritual reality, but rather to show us the mechanisms through which we can access it. Just as a radio does not create the music it broadcasts but merely tunes into it, perhaps our brains are the instruments through which we tune into broader spiritual realities. This new perspective led me to explore meditation practices from different traditions. I began meditating every day, alternating between Islamic Sufi techniques, Buddhist mindfulness practices, and Christian contemplation. Each of these practices seemed to offer a unique window into the very reality I had glimpsed during my near-death experience. One day, during a particularly deep meditation, I had an experience that vividly reminded me of my previous experience. For a brief moment, I felt that light and unconditional love again. It wasn't as intense as what I had experienced before, but it was enough to convince me that this reality wasn't hidden away somewhere far away, beyond death. It was always there, just beyond the veil of our everyday perception. My quest for knowledge also led me to question many of the teachings I had received throughout my life. I began to see how spiritual differences, religious views, and sacred words, while varying, all pointed to a universal truth. Souls may be different, but the essence of our quest is the same. However, this understanding did not come without difficulty. The more I learned, the further I moved away from the literal and dogmatic interpretations of the religion I had grown up with. This created conflict not only with my former community, but also with some of the friends I had made in the world of near-death experiences and alternative spirituality. Some accused me of being too intellectual, of trying to rationalize an experience that should be lived by faith. Others worried that my interest in science might somehow diminish the spiritual significance of NDEs. For me, however, science and spirituality were not opposites but complementary. The more I learned about the brain, consciousness, and the nature of reality, the more I marveled at the mystery of existence. Knowledge did not diminish the miracle, it magnified it. One night, reflecting on everything I had experienced, I took out my diary and wrote, "The search for answers has shown me that the greatest truths lie not in the answers themselves, but in the questions we ask. Each new discovery opens the door to more mysteries. And perhaps that is the point, not to arrive at a final destination of absolute knowledge, but to continue growing, exploring, marveling at the vastness of what we still do not know." As the years passed, I began to realize that my near-death experience was not the end of one journey, but the beginning of a much larger journey. A journey of discovery, not just about the beyond, but about the nature of reality, consciousness, and what it means to be human. It was a journey that unfolded every day, with every new book I read, every meditation I practiced, every conversation I had. And while I learned a lot, perhaps the most important lesson was this: the more we know, the more we realize how much there is still to know. And it is in this humility, in this continual openness to mystery, that we find a deeper form of wisdom. As the years passed and my journey of self-discovery deepened, there was one thing that still weighed heavily on my heart: my family. The pain of separation, although softened by time, never completely disappeared. There were days when the sound of a familiar laugh or the smell of a dish my mother used to prepare would bring a lump to my throat. The brief phone call I had received from my mother after my lecture at the university had planted a seed of hope. Perhaps, with time and patience, we could rebuild some kind of relationship. But I knew that the road would be long, and that many bridges would still need to be rebuilt. I started sending my mom occasional emails. At first, they were just simple updates about my life, how I was doing in college, what my job at the bookstore was like. I didn't mention anything about my spiritual experience or the lectures I was giving. I wanted to rebuild our connection slowly, without pressure. To my surprise and delight, my mom started writing back. Her responses were short at first, sometimes just a few lines, but over time they got longer. She would tell me about her family, what was going on in the neighborhood, but she never mentioned my dad directly. Sometimes she would blurt out something like, "Your dad would be proud of your grades." After about 3 years, I received an email that brought tears to my eyes. My mother wrote, "Tarik, my son, I know we don't agree on many things, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, you will always be my son, and I will always love you." It was like a balm to my soul. I wrote back immediately, expressing all my love for her and my desire to see her. To my surprise, she agreed. We arranged our first meeting, for coffee in a neutral location, far from home. When I saw her walk in, my heart raced. She looked different, but at the same time she was the same. We hugged, a long, tight hug that said more than any words could ever say. The conversation started out tense, full of awkward silences and superficial topics. But gradually we began to explore deeper topics. She told me how hard it had been for her when I left home, how she had cried every night for weeks. "I didn't understand," she said. "I still don't fully understand, but I've begun to realize that maybe I don't have to understand everything in order to love." Her words touched my heart deeply. I realized that in my search for truth and understanding, perhaps I too had been inflexible at times. Maybe love and acceptance were more important than agreeing on everything. From that day on, we began to meet regularly. Sometimes we talked about my experience and current beliefs. Other times we just shared happy memories or talked about the present. My father took longer to open up. For almost 2 years, he refused to see me. But my mother, little by little, tried to soften his heart. Finally, on the day of Eid al-Fitr, the festival that marks the end of Ramadan, I received a message from my father. It was short and formal, but he invited me home for dinner. With my heart racing and my hands shaking, I replied that I would go. Walking into my old house after so long was surreal. Everything felt simultaneously familiar and strange. My father stood in the living room, stiff and formal. We greeted each other with a stiff handshake. Dinner was a mixed bag of emotions. There were moments of awkward silence, but also glimpses of the old family dynamic. My mother tried to keep the conversation flowing, talking about neutral things, like the weather and what was new in the neighborhood. Late in the evening, as he was about to leave, my father finally brought up the elephant in the room. "Tarik," he said, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion, "I still don't understand your choices. I still pray that Allah will guide you back to the right path, but you are my son, and I think we have wasted enough time." While these words were not a blanket endorsement, they were more than I had hoped for. It was a beginning, an opening for dialogue. Over the next few months and years, I continued to work on rebuilding my relationship with my family. It wasn't easy. There were heated arguments, moments of frustration on both sides, but there were also moments of connection, laughter, and even more frequent visits. I was gradually invited to family events, and some cousins who had previously been hostile began to treat me with more respect, while others were genuinely interested in learning more about my journey. One day, during a family gathering, my young cousin Ahmed took me aside. "Tarik," he said quietly, "I have doubts about our religion too, but I'm afraid to talk about them. How did you find the courage?" His question reminded me of how important it was to keep these bridges open, not to convert anyone, but to create a space where people could explore their doubts and questions without fear of judgment. Over time, I realized that reconciliation didn't mean we all had to agree or see things the same way. It meant making room for our differences, finding ways to love and respect each other despite them. In a particularly meaningful conversation with my father years after we were reunited, he said something to me that I will never forget. "Tarik, I still believe that Islam is the true path, but I see how your journey has changed you, how you have become a more compassionate and thoughtful person. And I think that perhaps Allah has a greater plan that we don't fully understand." These words represented how much we had both grown, both individually and in our relationship. It wasn't a complete acceptance, but it was an acknowledgement of the value of my journey. Reconciliation with my family and community continues to be an ongoing process. There are difficult days, moments of misunderstanding and frustration, but there is also a deep gratitude for the second chance we have been given to reconnect. My experience has taught me that true love transcends differences in beliefs and perspectives, and that sometimes the most courageous and spiritual act we can do is to reach out across the chasm of difference and say, "I may not understand you completely, but I love and respect you." This journey of reconciliation has shown me that true spirituality does not separate us from others, but connects us in deeper and more meaningful ways. And for that, I am eternally grateful.